The Department of Public Health and Human Services is pleased to bring you Aging Horizons. Medicare, Social Security, fraud and legal issues, veterans benefits and caregiving. Aging Horizons is a program dedicated to inform and prepare Montanans on these timely issues, making a difference to you and your loved ones. Here now is today's program host.
Hi folks, today on Aging Horizons we have a great show for you. It's part 2 of our Mary Ronan, Girl of the Gulches program with Ellen Baumler from the Montana Historical Society. We're going to have a lot of really interesting Montana history to tell you about, and just as a reminder, keep with us because we'll have more in the future, so stay tuned.
Good care is your right. In Montana, there's over 11,000 beds in nursing homes and assisted living facilities. If you or a family member needs assistance or help in obtaining information about care issues and placement options, call 1-800-332-2272. If you or a family member need information about Montana's long-term care resident rights, or if you need help solving a problem or a complaint about a nursing home or an assisted living facility, call us at 800-332-2272.
Summer in Montana is a great time to visit your local farmer's market. Enjoy the social atmosphere while shopping for a wide variety of fresh, locally grown produce. Together with both WIC and Senior Farmers Market nutrition programs, you help feed your family 5 or more daily servings of fruits and vegetables for better health. You also help local ag producers and enhance the state's economy. So, for summer fun that's nutritious and helps Montana's economy, shop at your local farmer's market.
Questions about Medicare and other types of insurance? Contact the State Health Insurance Assistance Program office to get answers to questions like, what is the difference between Medicare and Medicaid, and how do you decide if you need Medicare supplemental insurance? This insurance counseling program is not a sales program. It is available to provide answers to your insurance questions. For more information, call the State Health Insurance Assistance Program office at 1-800-332-2272.
If the Aging Network in Montana was a restaurant, the sign out front would say, over 50 million meals served over the last 30 years. Since adequate nutrition is critical to health and quality of life, nutrition services are an important factor in keeping older Montanans healthy, independent, and living in their community and home. To find out more about senior nutrition programs in your area, call 1-800-551-3191.
Hi folks, and welcome to Aging Horizons, brought to you by the Department of Public Health and Human Services. I'm Kim Yeverman, your host, and today is part 2 of a program that we've named Mary Ronan, Girl from the Gulches. We have a very special guest back with us today, someone who's been so gracious as to be with us before, Ellen Baumler from the Montana Historical Society. Welcome back, Ellen.
Thank you for having me again.
Yes,
yeah.
It's so good to have you. Since this is part 2, let's just do a little recapping from part 1, just in case people need a little refresher.
Yep.
Let's first talk about the fact that we have a territorial anniversary coming up.
We do. This year, 2014, is the anniversary, the 150th anniversary of the creation of Montana Territory.
Wow.
And so that is a really big milestone for us. And next year, 2015, is the 150th anniversary of the creation of the Montana Historical Society, 1865. And it was, it is the oldest, one of the oldest organizations of its kind west of the Mississippi. And, it's just incredible that those founding fathers had the foresight a year after the creation of the territory to say, this is going to be important someday, and we had better collect these things. And unfortunately, they did a good job of collecting all the early records, documents, court records, and that kind of thing. But unfortunately, there was a fire, and the early records in early 1870s burned here in Helena.
Oh dear! And
so they kind of did have to start over. Not very much was saved, and but since then, we have fabulous records that do go all the way back to the beginning. We have the Montana Post, which was the first newspaper published in Virginia City back to the very first issue,
You know, and I hope that our audience really takes this to heart and takes a visit to the Montana Historical
Right.
Society, because there's just so much fun information and so educational too.
Well, and the staff is very helpful.
Yep.
You know, sometimes people feel intimidated, but it is a very comforting, homey place to come, you know, and
I don't feel intimidated. I just
good.
want to touch everything because there's signs that tell me not to. So.
Yeah.
And then finally, before we move on to some fun stories, we've also talked about in the last show the oral history aspect of our lives and how we should all take that pretty seriously.
Right. We have an oral history program, an oral historian on staff. And, you know, people don't think about their own lives as being important, but they are. And we historians, you know, we dig to find just the normal common stories of everyone, like your viewers.
Right.
And so it's so important to leave that record.
Right.
And whether or not you have a family member who's willing to record you, it's so much easier today than it was in Mary Ronan's time.
Absolutely.
Because things had to be dictated and typed. Now you can just, you know, talk into the recorder.
Right.
We have recorders available for the public to check out.
Wow.
And they produce CDs, and you can reproduce those and give them to all your family members and give one to us so that we can keep that story in a safe place.
That's awesome. I think that's a great idea.
Plus, we have a manual available that will teach you step by step how to conduct a good oral interview, and you know that's important also.
Well, I think that's maybe a place of a challenge for folks. As I was telling you, my father has done this for me, and I would have no idea how to really interview him, so I'm glad he's done it for me.
Yes, I wish I had a tape of my father. I really do.
Well, I feel very blessed.
Yes, you're very lucky.
Now, Ellen, we're running out of time, of course, in our first segment. We've got about 2.5 minutes. Let's start talking about Mary Ronan. I know that you had told me that she was in Virginia City for some part of her life.
Right.
So let's start talking about how she felt about being there.
Well, you know, leading up to Virginia City, she came with her family. Actually, she was born in Kentucky, and they kind of migrated west. And that's an interesting story in itself. But once they got to Montana, they were here just on the cusp of the discovery at Alder Gulch. They arrived at Bannock in 1863, and within a few days they heard the stories of the discovery. And
the discovery was
a gold discovery, one of the richest discoveries, you know, in the history of the West, really.
Right.
And people began to, you know, flock to Virginia City. Well, Mary's father was a freighter, so he left the family in Bannock and went on ahead and sold his goods and came back for them. And her telling of the trek to Virginia City to me is very memorable, because you really get a sense of how even children caught the gold fever.
Oh, really?
Absolutely. And her father had a span of mules, and they take the mules up this little rise, and they stop so the mules could rest for a few minutes. And down below, they see the miners and all of their industry down there. And Mary jumps down from the wagon and takes a stick and plants it in the ground and says to everyone, "I stake my claim." And everyone laughed, you know, but it just shows you that children were affected by that too.
Sure,
you know.
sure. And very much like today, children often mimic what parents
their parents.
are
That's
interested
exactly right.
in, and how fun that we have some proof that happened and that was said.
It's such a wonderful part of the book.
Yeah. Well, and you know, how old was Mary at that time?
She was 10.
Okay, so
she was 10.
Yeah.
And so once they settle in Virginia City, she has a lot of adventures, which I'll share some of those with you.
Okay, that sounds good. Well, folks, just got a few seconds left here in our first segment. Time always goes so fast. We've got a lot of great experiences and remembrances to talk about that Mary put into her diary or her memoir. And Ellen is going to be so gracious as to share it with us. So you don't want to miss any of it. Please stay with us.
Are you looking for a helping hand through the maze of human services? or for information on government programs and benefits that you may qualify for? The Information and Assistance Program provides information on all programs that meet our aging population's basic needs and programs that enhance their lives as well as the lives of their families or caregivers. If you have questions about Medicaid, Medicare, or other services and programs, please call 1-800-551-3191.
I had a pain in my back.
I just didn't feel right.
I was short of breath.
A pain in my jaw.
I didn't have any pain.
And just pressure in my chest.
I didn't know it.
I was having a heart attack.
A heart attack.
I could have died.
Know these warning signs and call 911 immediately. Most heart attacks start slowly and are not always intense with the typical chest pain. New medications and treatments can prevent disability and save your life.
It's possible.
It's possible.
It's possible for standard telephone users like you and me to communicate by phone with people who are deaf, hard of hearing, deaf-blind, or speech disabled. With Relay, it's possible. Of all 3-digit phone numbers, 711 is the one that makes possibilities possible.
It's possible!
Dial 711 to use your state's Relay.
The face of the American workforce is changing. People are healthier, living longer, and living better. Baby boomers are a valuable resource for the workplace of today and tomorrow. They're still active and eager to help. Experience, dedication, wisdom, these are just some of the significant assets older workers bring to the job. Age is an asset, experience a benefit.
Hello folks, welcome back to Aging Horizons, our second segment in our part 2 of our Mary Ronan Girl of the Gulches program that we've had a special guest helping us with, Ellen Baumler from the Montana Historical Society. And just before we get started, I want to just tell y'all that keep track of what's coming up for Aging Horizons. We are hoping to have some more really fun shows in the future that are about Montana history, and we really don't want you to miss those because fun is, we need some of that too. Now, Ellen, let's get back to Mary Ronan. When we left in our last segment, she had just gotten that gold fever. They were almost to Virginia City. You know, sort of, what were some of her experiences
So she had these great experiences, and she has this fantastic way of really making you feel like you're there and living it with her. One of the things that I love about her Virginia City experience is that she talks about the freedom that she had. She never had experienced such freedom. Her stepmother was always busy with the baby, and so Mary was sort of cast about, and she could go anywhere, do anything she wanted to do. There were very few other children. She had one friend named Carrie Crane, and she and Carrie used to go through, comb the hillsides and pick these big arms full of goosefoot. I don't know if you know what goosefoot is, but it's like dandelion greens. You can eat it as a salad. And there were many, many boarding houses in Virginia City, lots and lots of activity. But the one thing that they didn't have for the boarding house tables was any kind of vegetable. And goosefoot, once the miners had created these big tailing piles, goosefoot is something that grows very, very quickly. So they would go through and they would collect these big arms full of goosefoot and sell them to the boarding house keepers. They would also pick wildflowers and sell those to the boarding house keepers for their tables until her father found out. And that was not a good thing to do. Don't do that anymore. So her industry was ended there. But for a time, they had a great time doing that. The other thing, the other really favorite story that I have about her time in Virginia City, one of the things that the girls did was to go around and clean the miners' sluice boxes. Now
let's tell us what a sluice box
is. A sort of a trough. Oftentimes they're quite elevated, and they will have a ladder going up to the top. The miner will pour dirt and water down the trough, and the gold will stick in the crevices or end up as the heaviest element in the soil, end up at the bottom. And so at the end of the day, Carrie and Mary were allowed to go around with their hairbrushes and straws, and they would clean the miners' sluice boxes, and they would collect the gold dust that the miners didn't bother to get out because it was too much trouble. She had a gold poke like this. And
now you call that a gold poke?
It's called a gold poke. Okay. All the miners had them, and Mary had one too. And this is where they would keep their gold dust. And of course, they used no money, no currency.
Right.
Everything was measured in gold dust. Well, anyway, one day after 5 o'clock, she and Carrie went around to clean this particular miner's sluice box, and they thought he was finished for the day. She had a brand new bonnet that her stepmother had just made for her, and it had these beautiful pink ribbons on it, and she was so proud of it. She took it off and laid it very carefully on the end of the sluice box. And she didn't know that, and she and Carrie didn't know that the miner was climbing the ladder at that point. And so you can imagine what happened. Here comes this bucket of dirt and water whooshing down the sluice box. And you can imagine what happened to the bonnet.
Yeah.
So Mary and Carrie popped up and probably scared the miner half to death. He didn't know they were there, and they didn't know he was there. And she stamped her foot and said, "Mister, I'm never going to clean your sluice box again." And that was how she met her husband, Peter Ronan.
No kidding.
And that was Peter Ronan. At the time, he was in his 20s. She was 10. And later, later, she was always very embarrassed and didn't want to look at him anymore.
Sure.
Peter and her father were good friends.
Sure.
And so the story continues actually in Helena when they come to Helena. He's the editor of the Rocky Mountain Gazette. And she doesn't really want to see him on the street, but they do actually hook up again, and they begin to keep company, and they do become engaged. She was 16 and he was 30.
Which was
normal,
in those days. That was very normal.
Women.
Yep.
There's really nothing unusual about that. But her father came home from a freighting excursion and discovered that she was engaged, and he said, "My daughter is not getting married.
Wow.
She's too young." But it was an embarrassing situation because he was good friends with Peter Ronan.
Sure, yeah.
And so his solution is to just give up everything and have her break off the engagement, and they went to California and homesteaded there.
Wow.
But back to Virginia City and her time there, that's a little bit getting ahead of the story a little bit. Other things that she writes about in Virginia City, she went to school in a tiny little one-room cabin, and actually that cabin is today in Nevada City.
No, really?
Yes.
Okay, so it was moved.
It was moved. But Professor Dimsdale, Thomas Dimsdale, was her teacher. And he was, of course, the author of Montana's first book, The Vigilantes of Montana.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that is so great. That the story about how she met her husband.
Yes.
Just wonderful.
Isn't that a wonderful
and
story?
I just feel so fortunate that we have the capability to see that this happened, to read what happened, to read their words, and to somehow a little relate to what that must have been like.
It's like the founders of the Historical Society. Mary and her family, is very conscious in preserving that story.
Sure.
And we're so glad that they did.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, folks, we have lots more to tell you about. This is really being a fun and interesting show, so don't go anywhere. Stay tuned.
Here in Montana, we love our outdoor activities. Unfortunately, few of them are risk-free. Indeed, Montana is second in the nation per capita in head injuries that can destroy the lives of people we love. That's why you should insist your family always wear protective helmets. But you can do even more. When you fill out your vehicle registration this year, circle the Y and donate $1 to support traumatic brain injury prevention and education. Now that's using the old noggin.
Every generation produces heroes, men and women who step forward to defend our country in time of need, no matter the personal cost to themselves. And though we can never fully repay them, we can make sure they have access to low-cost, long-term care when they need it. That's what Montana's Veterans Homes are all about. If you've got a hero in need in your family, call us. We can help.
Sometimes the difference between having the life-saving medications you need and going without is the premium on your Medicare drug insurance. If you are a Montana resident enrolled in the Medicare prescription drug program, you may be eligible to receive help with your premiums, even if you own your home or other assets or think you may have too much income. Call or visit the Big Sky RX website today to find out if you qualify.
There you go, ma'am. See you next month.
Thank you.
All across Montana, people are making a difference.
Well, my Arthritis Foundation exercise program is a lifesaver to all the participants that are in it.
I bent down to pick up a piece of trash, and when I stood up, I started walking backwards down the steps. I managed to stay up because of a lot of the exercise we do helps with the balance. My lifesaver.
For more information, visit dphhs.mt.gov/arthritis.
Hi folks, welcome back to Aging Horizons. Our program today is part 2 of a program we've called Mary Ronan, Girl of the Gulches. And we have with us Ellen Baumler, interpretive historian from the Montana Historical Society, who knows way more about Mary Ronan than maybe she should. Now, back to some of the adventures that Mary had. We've talked about some of the things she's done in Virginia City, but I understand she had some pretty exciting things happening in Helena as well.
Exciting times in Helena, too. Like most of the population of Virginia City, when gold was discovered at Last Chance, in 1864, most of the population moved to Helena, and the family did come in 1865, so she was there very early, and witnessed some of the vigilante hangings here in Helena, actually. And she writes about that in such an interesting way, saying that one day she came to school, and in the schoolyard, which was on Rodney Street, she could look down and she could see the hangman's tree there, and there was someone hanging there, and the boys were all talking about it, and she hated that talk, and she didn't want to hear it anymore. But she said, the thing that she always tried to forget that incident, but the creaking of the hangman's rope always stayed in her mind. Yeah. And the one part of it that was so poignant to her was the man's wrinkled boots that she could see dangling there. So, there were good things and bad things.
Certainly.
But she also met Peter Ronan again. They became engaged, as I mentioned before, and she did have some wonderful, wonderful times in Helena. One great adventure was sledding down Broadway, where sledding was an activity forbidden girls. Girls could not do that.
Boys could, but girls could not.
Girls couldn't because of the skirts. If you ended up in a snowbank and upended, oh my goodness, you'd never live that down. And so this one particular Christmas Eve, they had been decorating the church and came out on Broadway, and that there's still a Broadway hill there. And they had a cut pine tree, pulled the tree out, invited her to step on the branches, got a running start, and she slid on this pine tree with Charlie Curtis all the way down to the bottom of the Broadway hill. And it was the most exhilarating experience she ever had.
Absolutely.
The way she describes it, it's just absolutely wonderful. Anyhow, the family then did go to California, and they homesteaded.
From Helena.
From Helena, they went to Careen, Utah, where the Northern Pacific was just finishing its line.
Okay.
This is 1869, I believe. And they worked on feeding the railroad crews, and it was horrible, horrible work. The men were terrible, not like the miners, who were very polite.
Right.
And she writes about that. Then they go to California, where the family does have a homestead. Her father sends her to Los Angeles Catholic school to finish, to become a teacher. He wants her to become a teacher, but Mary doesn't really want to. And so she kind of fails her mathematics exam. And I think she kind of did it. She never says she did it on purpose, but she said, she didn't really do so well.
Yeah.
So at this point, Peter Ronan, through the Catholic priests and sisters, begins to correspond to her again. And they sort of pick up their relationship. Louise McGinnis, who was Martin McGinnis's wife, sort of was the go-between, and asked her, do you want him to write to you or not? And she finally said yes and gave her permission. So they pick up a correspondence. Peter does propose again. And this time she was very torn whether she wanted to get married or become a nun.
Really?
And she decided that Peter, she couldn't find a better man.
Yeah.
And so she accepted his proposal. He asked her father gave permission this time.
Good.
And Peter then comes to California. And in the shadow of the San Juan Capistrano mission, which is where their homestead was, they're married. Only 2 people attend the service, her father and Mrs. McGrath, who was a woman that Mary had known in Virginia City. It's such a small world.
Right.
The people that she knew in Virginia City, she also knew in California,
Wow.
some of them. So they're married. They come back to Helena as a married couple, she's a bride. And again, Peter is the newspaper editor, and he is burned out. Finally, a couple of times, and finally the last time, he's really without a job. They go to Blackfoot City for a time and do some mining, but he really doesn't know what the future lies, and all of a sudden, he is presented with the opportunity to become the Indian agent to the Flathead Reservation.
Wow.
And so in 1876, they embark on a whole new chapter, and they have 1 child already.
Sure.
And they travel to the Flathead Reservation. And there, you know, Mary has a lot of really wonderful experiences too. She eventually has 8 children, all of them raised on the reservation. She sees the changes, and particularly she talks about the change in language and how the loss of the Salish language amongst the younger generation is so obvious.
Yes.
And you know, it's
even back
then,
100 years ago or so,
she
yes.
could witness this change.
Yeah.
And she's very conscious of language. As an Irish Catholic, her father taught her to speak Gaelic. She didn't understand it, but she could speak it. And so she had this ability to pick up guttural type of languages. And she spoke Salish because it was a very guttural language. And she was very conscious of the loss of the language among them. But
well, I was just going to say, we just have a minute left, and I want you to tell us the best Mary story
So
you
this
have.
is the best Mary story. Chief Arley was a very formidable character, and she was terrified of him. And she met him on the front porch this one morning when she was drying her very long hair, which hung down below her knees. And Arley came up behind her and grabbed her hair like this, and he goes like this, and the interpreter says, she thinks he's going to, you know, kill her, and he's going like this, and the interpreter says, don't worry, he's just measuring your hair. He's never seen hair so beautiful or so long, and he wants to go home and tell his family how many hands long your hair is.
Folks, this has been a fun show, so please remember, watch us again, and have a
Preserve
good
your
day.
own story.
Special thanks to the Department of Public Health and Human Services for their continued support. Hosts on Aging Horizons are program specialists at the Montana Office on Aging. Production facilities provided by Video Express Productions. For more information about Aging Horizons, call the Department of Public Health and Human Services toll-free 800-332-2272.